Hello, today we're going to be talking about political parties, both Republicans and Democrats, the two major parties, as well as minor parties. We're going to be talking about their history, their functions, what they do, what their goals are. And so this is chapter 5, which covers everything we need to know about political parties. So political parties are a group of people whose main goal is to control the government. This is accomplished through winning elections. Okay, so how does any party control the government? They have to win positions, whether it's at the national level, such as the president, senators, at the state level, so governors, state representatives, state senators, at the local levels. So throughout all these different levels of government, parties focus on trying to win the elections. So once party members win the elections, then they hold public office and they're able to control politics, control policies, and steer basically the country in the way that they see fit. Okay, so the first element to a political party is organization. Political parties are major, complex organizations. This consists of party leaders, so people who are very prominent, people who are very well known, in their position. So, for example, President Trump would be considered a leader for his political party because he holds a very high position. He's very outspoken. He's got that media presence. Nancy Pelosi would be an example of a party leader for the Democrats because she's got that platform. She's got access to the media. She's very outspoken, very well known. So people who are able to get that attention for their party and steer their political party in different directions, those are considered party leaders. Activists are people who support the parties, again, trying to get the parties to be successful in their goals. So, for example, people who work on campaigns, trying to get certain candidates elected, people who work on helping to develop policies, things like that. And professionals are people who work for the political party. So there are many people who their full-time job is to work for the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, and they work on things like data analysis, speech writing, fundraising. So parties are very complex. They're just like businesses, and they need people to be able to carry out functions to keep them working. Okay, then within the government, the two sides to a political party are the candidates. Those are the people who are actively running for office. So this is a huge election year. We've got a presidential election year. A third of the Senate is up for re-election. Representatives, so any of those people who are running for those positions on behalf of their party, those are a main focus this year, especially because it's a big year for elections. And then once a candidate successfully wins a position, they become an office holder, and then from there they work for their party to try to get policies passed in their favor. The electorate is the entire eligible voting population in the United States. So within the electorate, so these are just average citizens who don't really work in politics, they still play a critical role in that political party. So there are people who identify as Republicans or Democrats, as you or your parents may do so. You would be considered to be a key part of that party. People who support parties through donations, volunteering, putting up a sign in your lawn, a sticker on your car. If you support a political party in any way, you're considered to be a part of that party. And if anyone who votes based on party label, there are plenty of Americans who vote, not even necessarily based on the candidate themselves, but they vote for, oh, this candidate's a Republican, okay, I'm going to vote for him. Or this candidate's a Democrat, I'm going to vote for him. So they vote based on party label, based on who's a Republican, who's a Democrat. Parties serve as a vital link between people and government. So what that means is that political parties provide access to being able to know political issues and what's going on in the news. So for example, right now, major issue is the COVID-19 situation. And how do you remain aware of what's going on? Because you're listening to our government leaders. Okay, so our governor is a Democrat, so she, in her position, is able to inform us with things that are going on in regards to that situation. Meanwhile, our president is a Republican, so he's able to use his position as a Republican Party leader to inform us of how the situation is playing out across the whole country, not just our state. So political parties work to inform the American people of different political issues, things that are going on. They also unify Americans, and this is to some extent. So what your book means by unifying the American people is that political parties unify like-minded Americans. So people who all lean toward the Republican conservative side, they feel a sense of unity and support for their leaders and their politicians that they support. Meanwhile, people who fall on the more liberal side, who tend to agree with the Democrats, they're more unified with each other. So then, of course, between the parties, between Republicans and Democrats, there's not as much unity, but within the parties, there's unity. Okay. Parties also nominate candidates for public office. So, for example, 2020 is a presidential election year. President Trump will get his party's nomination because he is eligible for re-election. For the Democrats, they needed to pick who is going to be the candidate to also run for president this year. So nomination happens at the party level. So what has been happening across different states is the members of the Democratic Party within each state have been voicing their opinions and voting for which Democrat they want to be the presidential candidate. And we started off with a ton of candidates from the Democratic Party. Eventually, it's gotten narrowed down, so it seems like Joe Biden is going to be the main Democratic candidate going into the election. But this was done at the party level. This took Democrats from across the country to voice their opinion and vote for which of their party members they wanted nominated for the office. And we're going to talk more about nominations in a later chapter. Parties also work to inform their supporters. So once candidates are running for office, parties focus on putting out ads, flyers, posters, going door to door to inform people, distributing petitions, any way they can get voters informed of issues and what candidates they're supporting. Okay. Political parties also take stands on issues. So I would say some of the more prominent political issues of recent times have been climate change, gun rights versus gun safety, abortion. Those political issues, they're brought to the American public by political parties who have taken stands. So Democrats have taken stands on these issues, Republicans have taken stands on these issues, and they communicate their opinions and try to get support for policies. Parties also work on criticizing opposing candidates. So unfortunately, we see a lot of negative political ads come election time. So that's just something that happens, unfortunately. And they also, again, work through distributing things like flyers, signs, ads to get voters educated and informed on topics to try to persuade them to vote a certain way. Okay. Parties also, once they're in office, they work on governing and actually running the country. So it seems like so much effort is put into campaigning and winning the office, but once a candidate wins the office, they have a huge job, which is to actually run the country or run the state. So this is where Congress comes into play. This is where the president, the governor, this is the main focus of their job now, is once they've successfully won, they need to get policies passed. And especially we see in these big legislative bodies, Congress and state legislatures, they're often divided between Republicans and Democrats, debating back and forth about passing certain bills, trying to win a policy for their side. The watchdog function occurs when the party out of power so not currently as powerful. They critically watch over what the major party is doing and provide criticism occasionally. So, for example, in the last few months, we have seen President Trump, who's a Republican, get a lot of criticism from Democrats in Congress. The reason this is happening is because the Republican Party is considered to be the party in power because they own the White House and the Senate. So the party out of power, the Democrats, you may have heard them being critical of the president's policies. You may have heard them speaking out against him. So basically, that's their job. As part of it is to try to be critical and present an other side to an issue to try to convince voters to vote differently next time so that they can become the party in power. So in the United States, we are considered to be a two-party system. Do we only have two political parties? No, we have a ton of parties. But the reason we're considered a two-party system is because even though we have a bunch of different political parties, there's only really two political parties that have a reasonable chance of winning an election. So this is the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. So even though that's why going into an election, you may see many candidates on a ballot, you're never going to see just two. So you'll see minor party candidates as well, but they usually don't win elections. Okay, so here's some example. If you have checked out the Guide to the Political Spectrum, so the other part of this chapter that you were supposed to view, you'll notice that it talks about red versus blue. So in our political system, the color red is used to represent the Republicans, and the color blue is used to represent the Democrats. So if you have heard the terms like red state, blue state, this is what this is referring to. So this is an electoral map of the most recent presidential election in 2016. The states that voted for President Trump, who's a Republican, these are the red states you can see here. And then the blue states voted Democrat, so for Hillary Clinton. So in presidential elections, and we're going to talk about this more in detail in a later chapter, we use what's called the Electoral College. In the Electoral College, each state is worth a certain number of electoral votes. It's easy to think of them as like points, basically, so you can see the number that each state is worth on the map here. So you can see Michigan's worth 16 electoral votes. This is loosely based on the state's population. So the state with the highest population, California, they're worth 55. States with the lowest population, they're worth 3. So you can see a lot of these ones here, worth 3 each. And so basically the goal is to get the majority of the electoral votes. And so even though across the country there were more than 2 presidential candidates, there were minor party candidates as well, you can see that not one state chose a minor party candidate. So that's why we're considered a two-party system rather than a multi-party system. Okay, this one is 2008, so this is when President Obama won for the first time. There's a lot of trends that may become apparent to you that you can see throughout our country. The West Coast and the upper East Coast, these are traditionally very blue states. You can see a lot of the same states ended up being blue for both of these elections. So the West Coast and then like the Northeast area, that's considered to be a heavily more Democratic region. And then the Great Lakes area traditionally usually is a blue state area. Usually these states here end up voting Democrat. You can see that in the most recent election, a lot of these went to red states where they're usually blue. So that is a change. That doesn't usually happen. So we'll see if that happens again in 2020 or not. Usually what we see also in elections is that in the South, these states are considered red states. So these states usually lean more Republican. And then here out West and in the Midwest, these states usually lean more Republican as well. This is 2000, so this is when President George W. Bush won the first time. So again, you can see some of the same trends. So it's usually like East Coast, West Coast, and Great Lakes end up being the blue states, where the interior of the country and the South ends up being the red states. Some states do go back and forth, so those are considered to be battleground states, states that lean either way. All right, so for the history of our two-party system, the framers, they were opposed to political parties. So if you were to read through the entire Constitution, it makes zero mention of any political parties. The framers didn't want political parties at all. They wanted candidates to actually run just based on their own name, based on their own experience, their own ambitions, their own goals. They didn't want party labels. They believed that political parties would divide the country, that they would cause people to fight and argue. In a way, they were probably right, because people do argue over politics. However, political parties did emerge early on. So our first political parties were the Federalists and Anti-Federalists, which we did talk about toward the beginning of the semester. All right, so in our electoral system, we have what are called single-member districts. What this means is that only one candidate is elected to each office. So, for example, in the presidential election, I'm going to go back a couple and show you the map. Okay, so in the presidential election, so here, a Republican candidate won Ohio. Okay, so we'll just use that as an example. There is nothing for getting second place. Okay, so if a candidate's running for office and they get even like 49% of the vote, they don't get anything. Only one candidate can win. So whoever gets first place gets in the office or the reward. Second place gets nothing. Okay, so it's kind of like that. If you're not first, you're last kind of mentality. Winner takes everything. Okay, so the candidate who receives the plurality, which is the most votes, win. A plurality means most votes. Sometimes it doesn't go above 50%. So in a really close race, you might see where one candidate gets 49%, one candidate gets, 47%, and then another candidate gets 3%. So whoever gets the most candidates, they win everything, whether it was close, whether they got 99% of the vote, or whether they got only barely even half the vote. Okay, so this type of system discourages other parties from forming, because if a minor, so say there's a third, great candidate out there and they get a significant amount of votes, they don't get anything. So a minor party would have to be equipped to defeat both a Republican and a Democrat, which is probably not going to happen. Okay, so over time, in general, Americans are very similar in their terms of what we believe in, the direction we want our country to go in. We don't have that many sharp political divisions. It does seem like we do. That's because the news likes to play up those disagreements and protests and unhappiness. However, Americans in general do have the same values, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, independents, or otherwise. For example, we do value freedom, we value national security and safety, we do value education, a clean environment, and the ideas about how we go about achieving those goals might be different. But overall, Americans are not as divided as it may seem. To put it in perspective, the biggest period of political division in our country's history was during the Civil War period, when it came to slavery versus anti-slavery, as well as what rights states had, which caused southern states to actually decide they did not want to be part of our union anymore. We, these days, do not have nearly any political issues that cause such a divide that we could have the Civil War erupt at any time. So we're actually very lucky, and it seems worse than it actually is. Also, keep in mind that parties transfer power very peacefully in the United States. This does not happen in other countries. So, for example, President Obama was a Democrat. Okay, when his time in office was up, President Trump became president from a different political party. Guess what? There was no war that broke out, no violence over it. Some people were unhappy and they may have protested, but it was still very calm and peaceful relatively. In other countries, when different leaders take over, there's a lot of unrest, a lot of violence. We don't have that in the United States. And so hypothetically, if the next president becomes a Democrat, again, I don't anticipate a lot of violence or unrest or disruptions. Parties are able to transfer power with minimal like unrest. So that's a good thing too. Okay. All right, so here's some examples of differences between typical Democrats and typical Republicans. You will be able to find more information on this on the Chapter 5 page. If you look at the Guide to the Political Spectrum, it goes more in detail about what liberal and conservative actually mean. But so these are just a few examples in general. And keep in mind that sometimes Republicans or Democrats do kind of cross the aisle and have views that might be a little different from their party, and that's normal. All right. Some countries have what are called multi-party systems, where there's at least 3 major parties. Okay, so the main countries that I put were Great Britain has 3 major political parties, and Mexico also has 3 major parties. Okay, the benefit to this type of system is that the more parties there are, the parties can become different and they can focus on different issues. It doesn't have to be this party or that party. Parties can get a little more diverse from each other, take even more different sides on issues. So this leads to better representation because voters have more choices. Again, in the United States, we do have more than 2 parties. So really, you do have more than 2 choices when you're voting. You can vote for a minor party if you want, but most Americans will not vote for a minor party. Most will vote for either Republican or Democrat. So most Americans will feel like they only have 2 choices. And a lot of times, if both candidates are unpopular or unappealing, voters will vote and say that they're only voting for this person because they're the lesser of 2 evils. In multi-party systems, the more parties you have, there's less of that lesser of 2 evils feeling, and more you feel like you have more of a choice. In a one-party system, there's only one political party. One-party systems are very common in dictatorships. So usually if you see a country that only has one political party, you can tell that the country is probably run by a dictator. Okay, so for example, I put Chinese Communist Party in China. Only the Communist Party is allowed to exist. It's actually written into their constitution that they can only be the Communist Party. So what that means is that on the surface, yes, they do have elections. People can vote. So it looks like it's a very democratic process. However, there's only one choice on the ballot. So really your choices are vote or don't vote, not who are you voting for. Okay, same thing in North Korea, for example. There's only one political party. That's Kim Jong-un's party. And the voters there, they don't really have a choice. That's who they're voting for. So it'll seem like on the surface, these candidates have been very successful because when you look at election results in these countries, guess what? Candidates win with 100% of the vote. That's amazing, right? So this guy must be really popular? Not really. Candidates win with 100% of the vote in these countries because there are no other choices. So that's why. Okay, so our first 2 political parties were the Federalist and Anti-Federalist parties. I'm not going to go too much into detail because we did discuss these parties earlier in the semester. The main point that the Federalists made was that they believed in wanting a strong central government with a lot more power than what we had. So remember, we were previously coming off of the Articles of Confederation, where our government was too weak, so they wanted to strengthen our government. The Anti-Federalist Party believed that the central government should be weak, not have as many powers. Okay, so over time, the Federalists are not really relevant anymore. They lost power starting in 1816. They haven't really been active. The Anti-Federalist Party is still around today. They've gone through some name changes. So the Anti-Federalist Party became the Democratic Republicans and then eventually they became the Democratic Party. So the same Democratic Party that we have today actually started off as the Anti-Federalist Party. So throughout our history, we have gone through periods where multiple, like the different parties have gone back and forth as far as holding power for a significant period of time. So starting in 1800, this was considered to be the era of the Democrats. So for most of the early 1800s, the Democrats were very powerful. They won most elections. They steered the country in the directions that they wanted to go into. This started with Thomas Jefferson, so he was one of the first Democrats, even though it was there have been others since him. And so the era of the Democrats ended with the Civil War. So here's some of the major issues. So high tariffs. Tariffs are taxes that we pay to buy products that are made in other countries. So for example, if we order items online from any other country, from Europe, from China, wherever, we could be paying more taxes on them. The goal of tariffs is to try to get people to want to buy American products rather than the foreign products. Okay, guess what? That's still an issue today. Still something we're talking about. Slavery is not legal in the United States anymore. So some of these political issues are not really relevant as much, but some of these issues do continue to come back over and over, such as tariffs. Then, starting in the 1860s, the Republican Party became very powerful. The first Republican president was Abraham Lincoln. So between the Civil War and the Great Depression, the Republican Party held the majority of offices in this country at the federal level, state, and local. You can see here, these are who their main supporters were. And then this era ended with the Great Depression. The Democrats did survive this era because they did get some support from southern states. So just like earlier in this presentation, I talked about how the southern states were considered to be Republican, like red states in recent years. In the 1800s, they were actually Democrats, so they've switched since then. Okay, and starting with the Great Depression, the Democrats did take power, and they were able to become very powerful and win the majority of elections and offices within our country. So from the Great Depression, so like the 1930s through 1968. Some of the main notable accomplishments of the Democratic Party during this time was the increasing of social welfare programs, all the New Deal programs. So things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those are all Democratic policies meant to help those in need in the United States, meant to help people who need assistance, especially like financial assistance. And those are all, many of them are still around today. Okay, so since 1968, we've been in this period that is called the era of divided government. Okay, so what this means is that recently, no major party has really had a significant amount of control. So our current president's a Republican, president before was a Democrat, the president before that one was a Republican. So our political system is continuously going back and forth in power between Republicans and Democrats. And so what this means is we don't have tight party control by one party like there has been in the earlier part of our country's history. And so it's pretty unpredictable. Any election year coming up, we don't really know what's going to happen because there hasn't really been a trend. The only trend has been that things keep changing. Okay, so also, in addition to the Republicans and Democrats, minor parties also have a role to play in our political system. Okay, and there's 4 types of minor parties. Ideological parties are parties that are based on a set of beliefs. Okay, so I put some examples here. Yes, there is a socialist party in the United States. There is a communist party in the United States as well. There are lots of other minor parties. Another example would be like the Libertarian Party as an ideological party. Republicans and Democrats also kind of fall in this category as well. So parties that are just based on a set of beliefs, a set of values, and policies that fit into those values. We also have single issue parties. These are parties that focus only on one issue or one policy matter. So, for example, the Right to Life Party is an anti-abortion political party. The Green Party focuses on environmental issues. Free Swell Party focused on an anti-slavery platform. They're still around, even though it's not, slavery is not really a political issue anymore. But so the point is that these single issue parties focus on just one political issue, but they care very deeply about their political issue. Like protest parties don't really have a clear-cut set of values, but what they do, basically, they just kind of criticize both major parties. So a candidate from an economic protest party, they would run for an office just basically saying, like, the Republicans are messing up, the Democrats are messing up, here's why you should vote for me instead. So they don't really say what they're going to do, but they work on criticizing other parties as well. And then splinter parties are parties that split away from a major party. So here's an example. What usually happens is if a well-known party member fails to win the nomination, they might go off on their own and start their own party. So, for example, Teddy Roosevelt, he did not win his Republican Party nomination for president, so he split away and created a different party, it's the Bull Moose Progressive Party. So, for example, right now, it looks like Joe Biden is going to become the Democratic candidate for president this year. So let's say Bernie Sanders decides he still wants to run. He can't run as a Democrat because he didn't get the nomination. He could, hypothetically, just go off and start his own party and take his supporters with him. I'm not saying he will, but I'm saying he could. Okay. So even though minor parties, it seems like they don't do a lot, they do have a role to play in our political system. Sometimes they help decide an election because they throw votes or they pull votes away from one of the major parties. Okay, and this is called the spoiler rule. So, for example, going into an election, if you vote for a minor party candidate, which is perfectly your right to do so, that is one vote that you could have cast for a Republican or Democrat that you did not. So if you vote for a minor party, and a lot of people vote for minor party candidate, then those are votes that the Republicans or Democrats are not getting. And sometimes this does decide an election. So if a very liberal minor party is running and they get a lot of votes, those are votes that Democrats wouldn't get. Minor parties also take more clear-cut stands on issues that are more controversial. The two major parties, their goal is to win the elections, so they don't take very controversial stands. They try to appease as many voters as they can. Minor parties are a little more controversial and a little more outspoken for those reasons. So political parties are very decentralized. What this means is that within a major party, there are different units. Okay, so for example, within the Republican Party, there's people who work at the federal level, state level, county, city. It's very fragmented and very spread out. The role of the presidency is a very important role in political parties. The advantage to the president's party is that the president becomes automatically the leader of his political party. And so what this means is that the president's party tends to be more unified. They have more resources because they have the president who's able to use the media and get a lot more attention for different issues. They tend to be better organized because they have a clear-cut leader. And so that's why the president's party usually has an advantage in politics, because the president himself is so powerful. All right, so again, going back to federalism, so looking at how state, federal, local governments all work together, this is a huge reason why political parties are so decentralized. Because there are offices that need to be won at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. So parties focus on winning those smaller offices as well as those bigger ones too. So that's a major reason why these parties are so decentralized. Also, again, going back to nominations are made within the party. So, in especially presidential election years, parties can be divided when trying to decide who should be the major candidate for an election. So, for example, right now there have been so many different Democratic candidates all wanting that spot as the candidate eventually to go on to face President Trump in the election. And so this can cause a lot of arguing within the party for Democrats who supported Joe Biden versus Democrats who support Bernie Sanders versus Democrats who support any of the other candidates as well. So that's one reason why parties are decentralized, because even within that party, there are lots of different people who want to be able to win those nominations and they each have their own supporters. And so then in about August of every presidential election year, so that includes this year as well, the National Convention is when party members meet to officially select their party's presidential and vice presidential candidates and write their platform that's going to carry them into the election for that year. So even though it looks like Joe Biden is going to end up winning the Democratic nomination, it's actually not official until it goes through the National Convention. Okay, and then again, at the state level, political parties are very decentralized. They're built around, they have a state chairperson who kind of runs things at the state level. But again, political parties, like there's not just one Democratic Party, not just one Republican Party. They're very much divided into different levels to be able to work more effectively. And same thing at the local level as well. Okay, so again, political parties are broken down even further to be able to focus on local issues and local elections. Okay, that was it for chapter 5. So hopefully you were able to understand, for the most part, the main basics of what I was talking about. If you have any questions or there's anything you want to discuss further, if you'd like me to go over some of these things again with you, feel free to contact me through email, and we can set up a time to work together and discuss things that you still need some clearing up or have some questions about.